They say the most painful betrayal comes from those we love the most. I never understood that until I caught my wife in another man's arms. It wasn't just her infidelity that destroyed me. It was the realization that everything I believed about my life was an elaborate lie. The home we built, the family we planned, the future we dreamed of. All of it shattered in an instant. And when the dust settled, I was left holding nothing but broken pieces of a life I once cherished. My story, a warning about the dangers of loving too deeply and trusting too completely. The morning routine at exactly 6:08 p.m. The alarm went off with its usual obnoxious jingle, marking the start of yet another day. Melissa, my wife, and I dragged ourselves out of bed reluctantly, squinting against the soft glow of early morning sunlight. I groaned as I sat up, my legs dangling over the edge of the bed, the weight of sleep still pressing down on me. "Why the theatrics? You sound like an old man," Melissa teased, already heading to the bathroom with her usual morning pep. I smirked and shot back, "After what you put me through last night, I might as well be." The memory of the previous evening's adventures flashed through my mind. Melissa always had a way of keeping life far from boring. This morning was bittersweet, though. Melissa was leaving for a week-long business trip, and the thought of being on my own didn't exactly thrill me. Sound of the shower filled the room. I briefly entertained the idea of joining her, but quickly decided against it. Last night had left me needing just a bit more time to recharge. Emerging from the bathroom a few minutes later, Melissa was the picture of energy in stark contrast to my sluggish state. "Come on, sleepyhead, time to rise and shine. We've got bills to pay," she quipped, giving me a playful nudge. All right, I'm up," I mumbled, dragging myself out of bed and into the bathroom for a much-needed wake-up call. By the time I was somewhat functional again, we met downstairs for a quick breakfast before saying our goodbyes. Melissa was heading to the airport, while I faced another routine day at the office. Melissa and I both worked for the same mid-sized manufacturing company in St. Louis. While I handled engineering, Melissa excelled as an attorney specializing in high-stakes negotiations. This time, she was off to Denver to hammer out a subcontract with a major aerospace company, a regular occurrence that came up a few times a year, each trip lasting at least a week. Melissa, at 35, was a sharp-driven professional with a striking presence, standing at 5'4" and weighing a lean 125 pounds. Her charm and confidence had captivated me from the moment we met. "I'm Steven Nelson, by the way, 37 years old, 6'FD tall, and a fit 165 pounds, thanks to regular workouts. We share a love for golf and often team up with friends for a round or two." Our story began at a company picnic, where I realized almost instantly that she was the one for me. The feeling was mutual, and within 6 months, we were married. 7 years later, we were still going strong. Just 3 months ago, we moved into our dream home, a place we hoped to fill with the laughter of children. Plans to leave her career behind once we started a family, transitioning to life as a stay-at-home mom. With both sets of grandparents nearby, we were eagerly anticipating this next chapter. Melissa even planned to stop taking her birth control pills after this trip, a decision that filled us both with excitement. After breakfast, I helped load Melissa's bag into the car. Tears glistened in her eyes as she slid into the driver's seat. "I can't wait for the day I don't have to travel anymore, sweetheart," she said wistfully. "I hate these goodbyes as much as you do," I replied, leaning in for a kiss. "I'll see you Friday night. We'll keep it low-key. Maybe take out so you can relax." "That sounds perfect," she said, her voice soft as she waved and drove off. I stood in the driveway until her car disappeared, then trudged back inside to finish my morning routine and head to work. The unexpected assignment when I arrived at the office, I made a beeline for Theo's break room to grab a cup of coffee before settling at my desk. No sooner had I sat down than the phone rang. "Nelson," I answered. "Steven, can you stop by my office for a moment?" "My boss, Hubert, asked." "On my way," I replied, grabbing my coffee and heading to his office. Hubert motioned for me to sit as I entered. "Steven, I've got something you might find interesting. Since Melissa's away this week, I thought of you. Kevin Carter, our field service engineer in California, is out sick, and we've got an issue with one of our models at a customer site in San Jose. You're the best fit to handle it, given your experience Interested. With not much on my plate this week and no commitments at home, I figured, why not? Sure thing. When do you need me out there? Right away, Hubert said. Check in with Lucy for travel arrangements and give the customer a call to gather more details. Let's get this sorted quickly. Got it. I'll head home, pack, and catch a flight this afternoon. I'll be at the fight this afternoon. Sight first thing tomorrow, I said, a surge of energy replacing my earlier sluggishness. Great. Safe travels, Hubert replied, signaling the end of the conversation. I stopped by Lucy's desk on my way out, filling her in on the plans and on way out, filling her in on the plans and leaving her to handle the logistics. The alarm on my desk phone buzzed as I sat down, signaling it was time to call the customer. I quickly dialed their number, introducing myself and diving into the details of their equipment issue. Getting a clear picture of the problem, I felt confident about resolving it. With that task complete, I grabbed my things and headed home to pack. As I drove, a grin tugged at my lips. A plan was already forming in my mind. If I wrapped up this job quickly, I could surprise Melissa with a detour to Denver on my way back. The thought of sneaking in a couple of extra days with her had me feeling lighter than I had all morning. At the airport, while waiting for my flight, I called Melissa's cell, but she didn't pick up. I left her a voicemail, casually mentioning that I'd be staying with my parents for a few days and could be reached on my phone in the evening. Everything went smoothly on my end, and by Tuesday afternoon, the customer's equipment was fully operational and they were satisfied with the fix. Wasting no time, I arranged a flight to Denver that would land around 9:00 p.m. Mountain Time. I checked out of my San Jose hotel, drove to San Francisco Airport, and grabbed dinner before boarding. Mid-flight, Melissa called me back. We had a brief chat where she asked about my folks, and I kept up the pretense that I was staying with them. She mentioned that negotiations were progressing, but admitted she was exhausted and planned to spend the evening unwinding in her hotel room. We exchanged our usual I love yous before ending the call. The devastating discovery by the time my flight touched down in Denver. It was nearing 9:45 p.m. I arrived at Melissa's hotel, where the staff verified my identity and handed me a key card to her suite. Letting myself in quietly, I immediately noticed a lamp glowing near her laptop on the desk. It was closed and the room was otherwise still. Melissa, however, was nowhere to be seen. Feeling slightly puzzled, I sat down my suitcase and checked the bedroom and bathroom. Both were empty. Shrugging it off, I figured she wasn't back yet and debated whether to wait for her or check the hotel lounge. That's when I noticed the door connecting to the adjacent suite was slightly ajar. Something about it caught my attention, and I moved closer, opening the door cautiously. Stepping into the adjoining living room, I found it empty, but a muffled groan from the bedroom made my stomach drop. My chest tightened, and a cold sweat broke out as I crept toward the sound. Standing in the doorway, I froze, struggling to process the scene before me. Dimly lit room revealed Melissa, completely naked, with an unknown man. His face was turned away, but their intimate positioning left no doubt about what was happening. For a split second, anger surged, and I wanted to burst in and confront them both, but rationality took hold, tempering the storm of emotions. Instead, I slipped back into Melissa's suite, retrieved the digital camera I brought for work, and adjusted the settings for low-light photography. With deliberate calm, I returned to the doorway, silently snapping several photos of the scene, ensuring they were too engrossed in each other to notice me. Once I had what I needed, I stepped back into Melissa's suite and noticed her briefcase on the desk. Rifling through its contents, I found a business card belonging to Gary Price, the chief negotiator for our company. Pocketing it for later, I connected my camera to her laptop and uploaded one of the damning photos, setting it as her desktop background. I packed up my things and left the room as quietly as I'd arrived. Barely holding myself together, I returned the key card to the front desk and called the airline, securing a seat on the next flight back to St. Louis. Thankfully, a 6:30 a.m. flight would have me home by 9:30 a.m. Just around the time Melissa would likely open her laptop for work. The realization of her betrayal would hit her as publicly as her negotiations allowed. Afterward, I checked into a nearby motel. Sleep eluded me, my mind endlessly replaying the gut-wrenching scene from the hotel room. The tears I'd fought back earlier came in waves, each one leaving me more drained. By the time I left the motel at 5:00 a.m., I was emotionally spent, but resolute. Our marriage was over, and would make sure it ended swiftly. The aftermath: when my plane landed and I climbed into my car, my phone burst with notifications. Seeing Melissa's name on the caller ID, I ignored it and switched the phone off. As I walked into the house, the landline began to ring. The caller ID confirmed it was Melissa again. I let it go to voicemail, listening quietly as her tearful voice filled the room, pleading for me to pick up. "Stephen, please call me right away. I need to talk to you, honey. It's important." Melissa's tearful voice echoed through the answering machine. Ignoring her pleas, I went upstairs to change into something more comfortable before heading out to rent a U-Haul. Once back at the house, I wasted no time packing my belongings, determined to be gone well before Melissa returned home around 4:00 p.m. Within a couple of hours, I'd managed to clear out all my personal items and relocate them to a rented storage unit. Before I began packing, I had already scheduled an appointment with our lawyer for later that afternoon to officially start the divorce process. At the lawyer's office, I requested that the proceedings move forward immediately. Though I was tempted to cite adultery as the grounds, I opted for irreconcilable differences for now, keeping the adultery card in my back pocket in case things turned contentious. I also asked the lawyer to update my will, naming my brother as my sole beneficiary. Stopping by the bank, I transferred half of the balances from our shared savings and checking accounts into new accounts, solely in my name. I also contacted my investment advisor to take similar actions with our joint investments. With these steps complete, I drove to my parents' house, suitcase in hand, seeking refuge. When I walked through the open door, my mother greeted me with a surprised exclamation. "Stephen, where have you been? Melissa's been calling here non-stop looking for you. Did you tell her you'd be staying here?" Sitting down in the living room with my retired father, I explained everything: Melissa's infidelity, the end of our marriage, and my decision to leave. They were shocked, especially at the details of the betrayal, but they supported me wholeheartedly. When I asked if I could stay with them temporarily until I found a furnished apartment, they immediately agreed. It turned out my timing was spot on. Around 6:00 p.m., just as we were sitting down for dinner, the doorbell rang. My father went to answer it, and moments later, he returned with Melissa trailing behind him. She was visibly distressed. "Stephen, why haven't you been answering my calls?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "And why is all your stuff gone from the house?" I stayed seated, meeting her gaze with calm detachment. "I think the message I left for you on your desktop gave you all the information you need," I replied evenly. Melissa's face crumpled, her voice cracking. "Oh God, I was so afraid it was you. Please, can we go somewhere and talk, sweetheart?" I shook my head, my tone firm. "Melissa, I'm no longer your sweetheart, and there's nothing left to discuss. I've already started divorce proceedings. If there's anything that needs to be communicated, it'll go through our lawyers. What I saw in Denver shattered everything I felt for you. Now I need you to leave so I can finish my dinner. Please, Stephen. Don't do this without talking to me," she begged, desperation seeping into her voice. "What could you possibly say to justify your infidelity?" I countered, my voice cold. "It wasn't an accident, Melissa, and I have the evidence. My baby should call your lover, Gary, and let him know I'll be dealing with him tomorrow. Perhaps his wife will see this differently than I do." Melissa's hands shook as she pleaded again. "Oh God, can we talk? Please, Stephen." I stood my ground. "Melissa, my dinner's getting cold," I said firmly. "But here's an idea. Why don't you write me a letter? Explain how you rationalize breaking your wedding vows. You're a smart lawyer. I'm sure you can find a way to make it all sound like my fault while insisting you still love and respect me." Melissa turned to leave, her shoulders shaking with the sobs. Before reaching the door, she glanced back at me one last time. "Please, Stephen, don't end our marriage without talking to me." "Goodbye, Melissa," I replied, my tone unyielding. Once she was gone, my parents sat quietly, stunned by the exchange. "That was awfully harsh, Stephen," my mother said, breaking the silence. I turned to her, my expression hard. "Mom, do you want to see the pictures I took of her and her lover?" "That's what's harsh. She completely disrespected me, and I can't live with that. I'll never trust her again." My father, thoughtful as ever, finally spoke. Shook my head. "I don't think so, Dad. Let's talk about something else so I can finish my meal. The darkness descends the next morning. After a restless night filled with haunting visions of Melissa and Gary together, I woke early at my parents' house. I shuffled downstairs, made some coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and camera, determined to comb through the pictures I'd taken. I had one goal: to confirm Gary's identity in the images. Frustratingly, his face was always obscured in the shots, but my persistence paid off when I spotted something on his arm, a tattoo. Zooming in, I saw it clearly. A heart with the name Helen inscribed in the center. Helen was Gary's wife. The proof I needed was now undeniable. Feeling a grim sense of closure, I took a shower, got dressed, and prepared for the day. By the time I came back downstairs, my mother was bustling in the kitchen, making breakfast. I barely acknowledged her as I gathered everything I needed for the day. At work, I wasted no time. I burned CDs with the incriminating photos, printed several copies, including a blown-up image of Gary's tattoo. I put everything into a folder and marched straight to the Human Resources office, asking to speak with the manager. Tyler and I knew each other fairly well. In a company this size, paths crossed often, and we'd even played golf together a few times. As I laid the pictures in front of him, his curiosity turned to shock. "What's this, Stephen?" he asked, glancing between me and the images. "I'm sorry to drop this on you, Tyler, but these are photos of my wife and Gary Price. The date and timestamps show they were taken on Tuesday night during the negotiation trip in Denver. Clear violations of the company's anti-fraternization policy." Tyler leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Stephen, I'm sorry. That's rough. What do you want to do about it?" "You can terminate both of them for cause under the anti-fraternization clause in their contracts," I said firmly. "We've never enforced it before, but I'll be pursuing this." Tyler hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go that route? It'll expose their affair to everyone. And does this mean you're moving forward with the divorce?" "Yes," I replied flatly. "The papers are already being drafted. If you choose not to act, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal action against the company." Tyler sighed and nodded. "Okay, Stephen, I'll bring this to our legal department and get the process started." With that settled, I headed to my boss Hubert to update him on my personal situation. Hubert's reaction was what I expected: shock and concern. After explaining everything, I requested the rest of the week off as vacation time, which he approved without hesitation. Before I left his office, Hubert placed a hand on my shoulder. "For what it's worth, Stephen, you handled that situation with a lot of professionalism, and I want you to know you did a great job in California." I thanked him and left, ready to take the first steps toward rebuilding my life. As I was leaving, Lucy, his secretary, intercepted me. "Stephen, your wife was here looking for you. She said she'd come back later." I stopped in my tracks. "Lucy, under no circumstances do I want to see my wife. Please let her know that when she comes back." Her face fell. "Oh, Stephen, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize there was an issue. There's a big problem, Lucy. We're getting divorced." She and Gary Price have been, well, let's just say they've been involved. I didn't need to elaborate. Lucy's penchant for gossip guaranteed that word would spread across the plant by lunchtime. Back at my desk, I picked up the phone and dialed Helen Price, Gary's wife. We'd only ever exchanged pleasantries at company picnics, but I couldn't let Gary walk away unscathed, while Melissa bore the brunt of everything. Helen deserved to know the truth. "Hello, Helen? It's Stephen Nelson. How are you?" "Stephen," she replied, her voice pleasant but curious. "Gary mentioned you might be in touch, but he didn't say why." I didn't waste time. "Helen, we need to talk. Can I come over now?" "Of course, Stephen. I've got a hair appointment at 1:00, but I'm free until then." "Do you still know where we live?" "Yes, on Freeman, right?" "That's right. Okay, I'll be there in 15 minutes. As I pulled into the Price's driveway, a wave of apprehension hit me. What I was about to say would turn her life upside down, just as mine had been, but I couldn't let that stop me. Helen greeted me warmly at the door. "Hi, Stephen. Come on in. Would you like some coffee?" "I just brewed a fresh pot." "That would be great, thanks. Just black, please," I replied. Stepping into the living room, she returned with the coffee and took a seat across from me. "So what's this about?" she asked, her tone curious but calm. I considered softening the blow, but decided against it. It was better to be straightforward. Helen, this isn't easy to say, but I caught Gary and Melissa together in Denver. I have photographic evidence and I've already started divorce proceedings. I'm also having both of them terminated from the company. I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I wanted you to hear it from me before it becomes public knowledge. I watched her closely, expecting shock or anger, but Helen's face betrayed little emotion. I suppose I've had my suspicions about Gary's behavior on these trips, she admitted after a pause. I didn't want to believe it, though. He's always been a good husband and father, and I've been clinging to the hope that I was wrong, but deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something came to light. I guess this is it. Her composure surprised me. I'm truly sorry, Helen. For what it's worth. I didn't want it to come to this. Melissa and I were about to start a family, but I can't build a future with someone I can't trust or respect, especially the mother of my children. Helen nodded, her voice soft but steady. I understand, Stephen, and thank you for being honest with me. I'd rather hear it from you than through the grapevine. And as for Gary, I'm sorry for the consequences he'll face, but I can't say they're undeserved. Finding another job at his age, with comparable pay, won't be easy. I hesitated, then asked, would you like copies of the photos? I brought some with me. Yes, she replied, her voice quieter now. Leave them here. I'll find the courage to look at them later. I handed her the folder, my heart heavy. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Thank you, Stephen, she said, offering a faint smile. I appreciate that, and I'm sorry for what you're going through with Melissa. I'm sure she's as devastated as Gary will be when he realizes I know. As I stood to leave, she added, it would have been easier if it were just a one-time mistake, but I fear this has been going on for years, and that's a bitter pill to swallow. I nodded, unable to argue. Take care, Helen. And again, I'm sorry. With that, I left and made my way back to my parents' house, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The more I tried to move forward, the more I felt the sting of what had been lost. The spiral as the weeks passed, I found myself sinking deeper into a dark place. The anger I'd felt initially gave way to a profound sadness that seemed to permeate every aspect of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't focus on anything beyond the betrayal. What made it worse was the realization that Melissa and I had been planning to start a family. We were going to try for a baby after her trip. The thought of what could have been, family we dreamed of, haunted me relentlessly. 3 weeks after I'd exposed the affair, HR called me in for a meeting. Tyler looked uncomfortable as I took a seat across from him. Stephen, I want you to know that we've completed our investigation into the fraternization policy violation, he began, his tone measured. Both Melissa and Gary have been terminated, effective immediately. I nodded, feeling a hollow satisfaction. Thank you for handling it so professionally. There's something else, Tyler continued, shifting in his seat. We've received some concerns about your performance lately. My stomach dropped. What concerns? Several clients have reported missed deadlines and errors in your work. Hubert mentioned that you've been distracted and irritable. We understand you're going through a difficult time, but the company can't afford to have its reputation affected. I struggled to find words. I've been having a hard time, Tyler, but I'll do better, I promise. Tyler sighed. I hope so, Stephen, because right now you're on probation. We need to see significant improvement in the next 30 days, or we'll have to let you go. I left the meeting in a daze. The job I'd excelled at for years was now at risk because I couldn't keep my emotions in check. It was just one more thing Melissa had taken from me. That evening, as I sat alone in the guest room at my parents' house, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, I answered, my voice flat. Stephen, it's me. Melissa's voice sent a jolt through me. How did you get this number? Your mother gave it to me, she replied, her voice small. I told her it was important. What do you want, Melissa? I asked, struggling to keep my tone even. I need to tell you something in person. Can we meet? No, I said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say it now. There was a pause, and then, I'm pregnant. Stephen. The words hit me like a freight train. What? I'm 8 weeks pregnant. I found out last week. My mind raced. 8 weeks meant she was pregnant before the trip to Denver, before I caught her with Gary. It could be my child, or it could be Gary's. Is it mine? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, she admitted. I mean, it probably is, but you can't be sure, I finished for her, because you've been sleeping with Gary. Stephen, please, can we just talk about this face to face? I hung up without answering, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone. The possibility that I might have a child, that the family I dreamed of might be happening after all. But under these circumstances, was too much to bear. Circumstances was too much to bear. Sleep that night, my mind tormented by images of Melissa with Gary, of a child who might be mine, of the life I thought I'd have. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone, couldn't pretend to be functional when inside. I was falling apart. I spent the day in bed, ignoring my parents' concerned knocks on the door. By the end of the week, I'd missed 4 days of work. Hubert called personally to inform me that my probation had been violated and my employment was terminated, effective immediately. I didn't even have the energy to argue. The downward spiral the next few months were a blur of depression and self-destruction. With no job and no wife, I had no reason to get out of bed in the morning. My parents tried to help, but their concern only made me feel worse. I was a failure, a burden, a shadow of the man I used to be. I drank too much, slept too little, and pushed away anyone who tried to get close. My friends stopped calling. After a while, tired of my constant refusals to see them. Even my brother, who had always been my closest confidant, started to keep his distance. The divorce proceedings dragged on, complicated by the pregnancy. Melissa insisted on a paternity test, which I agreed to, though the thought of it made me physically ill. If the child was mine, what then? Could I be a father to a child whose mother I couldn't stand to look at? And if it wasn't mine, could I handle the final confirmation that everything in our marriage had been a lie? In the meantime, I was burning through my savings. With no income and mounting legal fees, I was forced to sell off most of my possessions. The dream home Melissa and I had bought was long gone. She'd been forced to sell it at a loss after losing her job. I couldn't even take satisfaction in that anymore. One rainy Tuesday, I found myself sitting in a bar downtown, nursing my third whiskey of the afternoon. The television above the counter was playing the local news, and I was swaying the local news, and I was only half paying attention until I heard a familiar name. Gary Price, a former attorney at Midwest Manufacturing, was arrested today on charges of embezzlement. My head snapped up as the reporter continued, explaining that Gary had been caught stealing money from clients. His new employer had discovered the theft during a routine audit. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, just a deep, consuming emptiness. Gary's downfall didn't change anything for me. Back my job, my marriage, or my dignity. When the bartender cut me off after my 5th drink, I stumbled out into the rain. Not bothering with an umbrella, I walked aimlessly for hours, letting the cold seep into my bones, hoping it might numb the pain inside. The breaking point, the paternity test results came back on a cold, gray morning in December. I sat in my lawyer's office, my hands shaking as he handed me the envelope. He asked gently. I shook my head, tearing open the envelope with trembling fingers. The medical jargon blurred before my eyes, but one sentence stood out starkly. The alleged father cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The child was mine. I don't remember leaving the lawyer's office or how I got back to my parents' house. I just found myself sitting on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at the wall. The test results crumpled in my fist. I was going to be a father. The news should have filled me with joy, with purpose, with hope for the future. Instead, it felt like the final twist of the knife in my already bleeding heart. How could I be a father when I could barely take care of myself? How could I co-parent with a woman I couldn't trust, whose very presence brought back memories of the worst night of my life? How could I love a child who would forever remind me of Melissa's betrayal? The thoughts spiraled, darker, until I couldn't see any way out. I was in a pit too deep to climb out of, with no light at the end of the tunnel. That night, I wrote 3 letters. One to my parents, thanking them for everything, and apologizing for being such a disappointment. One to my brother, asking him to look after our parents and to be a presence in my child's life if possible. And one to the child I would never know, explaining why I couldn't be the father they deserved. I placed the letters on the desk, alongside the paternity test results, and left the house quietly. I drove to a bridge outside of town, parked the car, and walked to the railing. The water below was dark and choppy, reflecting the turmoil inside me. As I stood there, contemplating the end of my pain, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to take the call. "Stephen," her voice was frantic. "Where are you? We found the letters." "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I just can't do this anymore. Please, sweetheart, come home. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to face this alone. It's too late," I said, my voice breaking. "I've lost everything, my wife, my job, my home. And now there's a child who's going to grow up with a broken father. How is that fair to anyone?" "Stephen, listen to me," my mother said firmly. "You haven't lost everything. You have us, you have your health, and you have a child who's going to need you, no matter what happened between you and Melissa. Please, just come home." Stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring down at the water. In that moment, I had to make a choice: to let the darkness win, or to find the strength to face another day. The aftermath, I'd like to say I made the right choice that night on the bridge, that I found the courage to keep going, but the truth is, I didn't. I dropped the phone and stepped over the railing. The fall seemed to take forever, giving me plenty of time to regret my decision, but by then, it was too late. The impact with the water was like hitting concrete, and the cold stole the breath from my lungs. I didn't fight it. I let the current take me, closing my eyes as the darkness enveloped me. They found my body 3 days later, washed up on a hot sandbar downstream. My parents were devastated, as was my brother. Melissa, I'm told, collapsed when she heard the news, the shock sending her into early labor. Our daughter was born premature but healthy, a small miracle in the midst of tragedy. They named her Hope, a name I would have loved had I been there to hold her, to watch her grow, to be the father she deserved. Instead, she'll know me only through stories, through pictures, through the memories of those who loved me. Melissa moved back to her hometown, taking Hope with her. She raises our daughter alone, haunted by the role she played in my downfall. She tells Hope that her daddy was a good man who loved her very much, even if he never got to meet her. A kind lie, but a lie nonetheless. The truth is, I was too broken to love anyone in those final days, even the innocent child who had done nothing wrong. My parents visit often, finding solace in the granddaughter who has my eyes and my smile. They've forgiven Melissa, understanding that blame serves no purpose now. They focus on loving Hope, on making sure she knows she is wanted and cherished. Despite the circumstances of her birth, Gary served 3 years for embezzlement, losing his law license and any hope of rebuilding his career. Helen divorced him and moved away. Starting fresh, in another state, the affair cost